All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the AI Math Guy podcast. I am here today with an incredible guest. Her name is Megan. Some of you may know her. She is a special education administrator and she currently serves at the Sunnyvale School District in California. And Megan, if I get any of this information wrong, please let me know. And she has 15 years of experience, and she also has her single subject and her master's from Stanford, which that's pretty awesome. And so before we go on, would you like to add any more information about who you are, Megan, and add a little bit of color and story behind anything that I shared?
Captured it. My single subject is in math. So I am an AI person and I am a math person. So it's a good fit for this podcast.
Very good. You might be the AI math gal. Okay, I don't know if that's okay. Anyways, let's move on. So tell me a little bit about what you do right now and your role in the special education field right now at
hmm
your school district.
Yeah, so I work as a program manager for special education in my school district. So that means I work out of the district office, but I also am frequently at our school sites. We have 10 school sites here, 8 elementary, 2 middle schools, and I work with our special education teams. It's a little bit difficult to describe what I do because every day is different, but I'm in meetings a lot. I do a lot of work with the legal aspect of special education. I handle a lot of data and I interface with a lot of people. So I think that summarizes generally what I do. And my favorite parts are when I get to go into classrooms and work with our teachers and see our students.
Sure. So there's a lot of legal things that you have to take care of at the district level, and your enjoyment really is to go into the classroom to work with teachers. Would you say you're almost like a specialist of sorts where you go in and support different types of special education educators?
So we support all of our special educators. So we have teachers, we have psychologists, related service providers like speech therapists, occupational therapists, and then we also work with specialists at the county. We place students outside at different schools also. So it's kind of everything. We're very much like we're generalists within a specialist like vertical is what I like to
Sure.
say. Like you have to know everything, but within that very specific vertical.
So there's vision and alignment with the district and everything that you have to do here, and also laterally, whether a psychologist, educators, or any personnel that has to do with special education, you have to be aligned horizontally as well. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
it's challenging to navigate all that. And maybe just a quick word before we go into my question about the hackathon and the AI. Tell us a little bit of why you chose special education.
Yeah, so I almost happened into it, which I think happens to a lot of.
Megan, I'm so sorry. I think you got muted.
There
There
we
you
go.
go. Okay,
All right.
perfect.
So I ended up with this position covering for a teacher who taught math, but in a special education school. So that's how I got into it. And then I ended up getting my credential in this area. And then when I got my admin credential, I wanted my focus to be in special education because that's what my experience was in at that point. I liked it because it was an additional challenge to support like a marginalized community that was not always receiving the full support that they needed in the school setting.
Yeah, it's so crazy just how often people's careers that they spend for the next 40 years of their lives, they often stumble upon.
Yeah.
And yeah, just your heart for marginalized communities. I think that's a lot of why educators go into education is because they want to serve these types of communities.
hmm
And yeah, so let's get into the hackathon. Tell me
Sure.
a little bit. So, my understanding is that you won a hackathon twice in a row, or not in a row, but twice. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I've won twice. and I placed in another one. One of the ones I won was the one of the first ones that I entered.
Mm,
And so that was back when I wasn't even really coding yet. I was just like vibe coding, as they would call it.
sure.
So just going on the different platforms and trying prompting. But after that win is when I really dove into like actually learning what it is to make apps and what the code should look like.
Yes. So started with vibe coding, and I think that's a term that I think we could unpack for our listeners. And before that, could you talk a little bit about what a hackathon is so that we all have a working definition of what that is?
Yes. So I think some people still have in their heads what it used to be, which was primarily college students going to in-person events and like actually hacking into trying to like break something, right? To find like where the vulnerabilities were. But I think now, especially with vibe coding and AI coming into play, it's much more broad now. And it's just any sort of event that has a start and end date, and you're trying to make some sort of product, and they will often have sponsors that offer some of their tools for a discount or for free. And your goal is to use these tools and to meet whatever prompt that they give you. And then ultimately, there are judges that judge, and then somebody wins. Sometimes there's pitches. People have to go up and talk about their product, present what they created. But I think it's become, it used to be much shorter of an event, like a weekend or even a day, but I think sometimes now you'll have some that span like months, weeks or months. And I think the ultimate goal for the companies is more exposure and for people to be using their tools. And then for the people who enter, it's to be able to try out these tools. There's a lot of hackathons I've entered where I've never used the tools that are being used, and it's a really good opportunity to see if that tool is something that you want to add to the tools that you use.
Yeah. Yeah, my understanding of hackathon, because my best friend is a software engineer and he used to do that when it was in college. And it
Mm.
would be like a 3-day event or like a 2-day event where you don't go anywhere and you don't eat. I think you do actually eat. I think they give you free food and you just code for 48 hours straight. And at the end, you produce like a feature or an app, and then you pitch it to people and compete with that. And I'm sure I think he did that several times. And I would imagine that with vibe coding now in the picture, which we'll talk about in a second, of what that is, I think it's giving a different space and a different color to hackathons. So that's awesome. Would you like to maybe then explain a little bit more? Okay, before that. So now the hackathon space is more open, I guess. It's not just for hardcore software engineers or people want to go into computer science. It's very open now. And so, like you, Megan, who is very interested in technology and AI, now stepped into a hackathon and to be able to create a product. So tell us a little bit about what vibe coding is.
So I'm pretty sure it was Andre Karpathy that coined the term. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the idea that you can use your words and prompt like you would with a chat GPT or a Gemini, and it builds for you. So I think when this first started, there were fewer platforms and they weren't as strong because the models weren't as strong. So you could go in and say, I want a landing page for my website on whatever, on flowers. And it would draft something for you. It would look very vibe coded, as people started to call it, which means often have the same gradients and the same type of font, but it would produce something for you that you could publish, often with links that were broken or just some issues that you would have to fix. But I think vibe coding has kind of expanded recently, and I wouldn't necessarily call myself a vibe coder anymore. There's negative connotations to the term in some spaces because I think Vibe coding feels very much like you're just throwing an idea out there and trying to get a result as fast as possible. But I think now a lot of us prefer to say we code with AI, which means we see it as a partner. And while we're still really driving the ship on what the final product will look like, and we provide like guidance and then let the AI go with that. The models have also gotten so much better. Claude Opus 4.6 just came out and it's amazing. It can throw up a feature that would have taken probably a few hours in the past to get to, and it can do that in one prompt now. So it's something that's evolved a lot since it first became a term. And I think now some people use it a certain way, some people use it a different way. It depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's so good. I have heard people say that people used to code with computer languages,
Mm.
and there will be a time very soon where people will just code with human language, and you
Yep.
just speak to it and describe the feature that you want. And I personally vibe coded and actually prototyped the startup that I have right now called Someta. It's an AI math app. And I prototyped it using vibe coding
Hmm.
and just pumped it out real quick to see if it would work. And it really allows the prototyping phase to be done very quickly. Now, it doesn't mean that's where you stay, because after you vibe code something, it breaks. At least my personal experience, I don't know about yours. It
Hmm.
has to be ultimately refactored, cleaned up, architected, because the code just becomes so messy. And even using AI to go over my code base and to say, hey, debug this or change this piece, it sometimes doesn't, it didn't work for me. But now it has been a couple of months since I did vibe code, so it could have been changed definitely. And yeah, the truth is, or the trend is, I think that these apps that used to take 10 people, like full-time software engineers, months, will now take you like 5 hours, which is
Hmm.
nuts. And I have seen, my best friend and I were talking about it, and he's the Microsoft interface, like with like folders and clicking on it and internet browser, like an AI prompt one shotted that software. And then we're like, that's insane. And so definitely the coding with AI rather than just vibe coding, because there could be some negative connotation with that. Okay, so that's what vibe coding is. That's what hackathon is. So you went into the hackathon, and I want to ask why you went in. But before we talk about the why, tell us, what app did you create? What were the two things that you produced that led you to the victory?
Yeah, so the first one, the bigger win, I guess, of the two, I made a AI social stories app. So all the things that I build for the most part for hackathons and just in general have to do with my work. There are so many issues in education broadly, but I think even more so with special education that could be solved by people from the inside creating apps that solve like very specific problems. So the first app that I had made was an AI social stories app that allows you to describe a character and then pick scenarios, and then it creates a social story for a child. So a little context on that is in the past, what our teachers would have to do is like find images. So wherever you would go, Google Images, some other place, and then they would have to type out the social story. They would have to print it, and then often you have to make like laminated icons to match with the story. So what I made was something that could generate that story very quickly. And when I first created it, it was on the platform that the hackathon was using. And after that, though, I took it after I had won, took it off of the platform, and then worked on it with Claude Code and other tools at the time. And so it now uses GPT Image One, which is ChatGPT's image like LLM. So, and I could switch it to Nano Banana, but right now it's doing pretty well on GPT-1. So what it does is it creates that story. You can edit any of the panels. So I have it where you can regenerate the image and you can type in new text. I also have it where it stores the appearance of the character, the main character. So then it looks consistent throughout the story. And then I have it where you can click play and it'll read the story to the child. And you can do this all digitally. You can also download and print it out if you still want that paper form. So that's the first one that won. The second one that won, I actually created for a specific student. There's a student that we have, and his OT told me, I think years ago, that he loves to draw animals like combined. So he'll take two animals that he really likes at the time, and he just always wants you to draw them merged together, or he wants to draw them merged together. He's very into giraffes and he also likes dinosaurs right now. So I was thinking of him because I really like the image part of AI. And so I made an app that I called Beast Blend that you can select from two lists, two different animals. You blend them together. It creates like the name of that animal, a little bio, and I even have it create like lesson plan ideas. And then because it was for this hackathon, I actually started it as a challenge that I gave myself. I did this 10 apps in 10 days challenge for no reason. So it was just that at first. And then I heard that the hackathon was happening and I had started the app in the window of the hackathon. So I was able to use it. So I was really excited about that. But to make it a winning app, I actually added where you could generate a story from it too, and then also have it read the story out loud. So this one used Nano Banana, and Nano Banana has improved since I first created it. So now when you select a different vibe for the story, it actually makes the images look different. It's a lot of fun. One of my occupational therapists uses it a lot for her students. They had asked me if I could a couple of the teachers had asked me if I could make it so they can generate coloring pages from the characters that they generate. So that was a one prompt ask that I did inside of Google AI Studios. And so it does that too. They can print it out and the kid can color it. So those are the two apps that won. The other small app that I made that placed and I got credits for it was something I called Backpack Check. So it's like an executive functioning app where you have to put items into a backpack according to what your day looks like. And so it that was never really advanced past like the hackathon stage, but I made it look nice and I think that's why it placed. Yeah,
Mm.
a lot of the winning apps I feel like are judges look visually first. So if it looks good and also if it has a good backstory, often it'll do well.
Thank you for the tips.
Yeah.
And so I love that. I think the social stories app, if I want to hit on that a little bit,
Mhm.
I think many times people want to build apps just to build the apps, which is cool. I think the true, not the true way, I would imagine the one of the most effective ways to actually build an app is to look at the processes that you are already doing in your job or your personal life that you do manually.
Mhm.
And you think to yourself, oh, I wonder if it is possible for me to get this process, break it down step by step, and give it to a machine to automate this process. And you were talking about like laminating this stuff and like creating the stories manually, and that took a significant amount of time. And now with AI, all that process you can break down and give it to the machine to do and automate for you. And so, what a cool concept with the Stories app. And I would imagine, I don't know like the psychological function of the social stories or special education because I'm sure like it's almost reflective of the students. Like when they're reading these stories, they're like, oh, I see myself in the story and they can maybe process what they're going through. I'm not sure. Do you want to speak a little bit about the backstory of the Social Stories app?
Sure. Yeah, social stories are used for often for students with autism, but it can be any student with or without special education needs. And a big part of it is to help with transitions or things that are new. So if a child is going on a field trip for the first time, you might have a social story that is, field trip, and it walks through everything that will happen so the child can read it and prepare. Sometimes it's used for behavior. If a child is not doing something that we would like the child to do, we might produce a social story that says, when you're on the playground, you don't steal the ball from Foursquare and run away. It's like things that you could typically tell a neurotypical student just in conversation. Sometimes it helps a student with special needs to have it in front of them and to read it multiple times, and we put it in their perspective too, so they're reading it as if it's about them. So it's like modeling the behavior, but in like a paper form. Just a different tool that we use for certain kids that will work really well. So we have some kids that might have, like 10 to 20 different social stories that they'll cycle through as things come up. We have like fire alarm, like anything that is surprising that could happen in the day, there might be a social story for it. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. So the concept of social stories is essentially for neurodivergent or students in special education. They need extra support or resources for them to see what good model behavior is. So instead of just being told because they can forget it, they have a piece of paper or this shared stories and they could look at it to remind themselves of the story. So it could be a reminder for them. Wow, that's really powerful. And I think it's now that a thought that comes to mind is I can see why you won, by the way. And like the story that you have, the why behind what you do and what you build, I think has such a, it's so important. It's so important.
Mm.
And just to see an educator or administrator care about your students so much to leverage different resources and technology to be able to serve them best, even if it means learning new skills, growing in ways perhaps that you might have not necessarily thought comfortable, because coding, when you hear it, it could be very scary. And the fact that you jumped into that and created an app that helped your students, and I know you talked about the two other ones, and I think just focusing on the share stories, I think is good for now. And I think that is really powerful. So when you won, how did you feel? Or actually, how many people usually participate in one of these hackathons?
So it definitely varies. I can't remember for the one I entered, but they pared it down. So there was a top 100 and then there was a top 10, I think, but it could have been less than that. It could have been six. But it really varies. Like Bolt had the world's largest hackathon, and I think there were thousands of people that entered. So that, yeah, it definitely depends on the size and like the platform and how well it's publicized. But yeah, I when I won this one, I knew I would win, which sounds cocky, but I don't
I
like
love that. No, that's
you can
awesome.
tell, and it wasn't from a like because I thought that I should win. I could tell in the way that they were asking me questions, and I could tell in the way that other people presented. It was still really exciting because it was a big prize. But when I got to the finals, we actually had to present our app live and do a demo. I do a lot of public speaking, like I speak at conferences and just in my role, I have to speak a lot. So I was excited that there was a presentation portion, and then they were asking me questions in a way that I could tell how they felt about the app. So I wasn't entirely surprised that I won, but I was very excited because for me, like I do things like this because I feel it's really important to push yourself to places that you're not comfortable in so that you can become comfortable in those spaces. That's how I've always seen my career. So I've always sought out positions that I hadn't done before and tried to do things that made me uncomfortable. I think that's the only way that you grow. And so that's why I really gravitated towards AI, because nobody really knows everything about it. It's like constantly being developed. So that for me was really enticing, and I like that challenge. But yeah, so the reason I had entered was because I wanted to challenge myself, but I also wanted to be an example for what educators, I think, should be doing now, which is taking our challenges, looking at the people that we can support, and coming up with our own solutions. So that was a big part of how I presented myself. This final presentation, I really wanted them to see me as somebody that was trying to solve problems for people. Like I had actual people that I was building this for, an actual problem that was a big part of my life, like what I do for a living. And I think that really resonated with the judges. It'll vary. You can watch sometimes judging for different hackathons. Some people are not looking for that. Sometimes they're looking for like how much you can push their product forward, and it's less about the background of the person or like who the app serves. But this one I could tell that's what they were looking for. So it really catered to my strengths. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I think one of the things that I appreciate about what you shared is the risk taking and the challenge. And I think for me too, I just get so bored when I do the same thing over and over again. I like to seek out new challenges. And I think my mind, and honestly, I think humans maybe are just all like this, where we have an itch for creativity. And we're like, man, like, I wonder what would happen if we went this route. And you go down the rabbit hole and validate if the idea has any water, holds any water. If not, then we revert and we try different things. And so I really love that. And I really think what you talked about with educators and being an example, I think I want to dig into that a little bit more, because not just the character part of risk taking, challenging the status quo, doing things that people might not do because it's scary, so on and so forth, all those things. Those are, I think, character based or of sorts. I think what you are also talking about, which I think is so fascinating, which I am totally on board with, and I think the new generation of teachers is teachers who can build, and teachers who can build, like you said, for a genuine need that they find in their community or in their schools and the population that they're serving, and are able to serve them more effectively because they themselves are builders and they don't have to rely on a third party vendor to build an app for them. Now, there are certain things, projects that third vendors need to not, yeah, it's just way more efficient for them to step in because it might be just an app that's absolutely huge and it just requires so much maintenance, so on and so forth. And at the same time, like what you shared about the shared stories, that's something that every teacher, I personally think, can do for not only themselves, but for their students. And so tell me more. What is this? I feel like you have a vision, Megan. I really do. I feel like you speaking this vision out to the educational world of, I don't know, the teacher founder or the practitioner founder, I think could be very powerful. So tell me more. What does it mean to be an example? What is the vision that you see for this?
Yeah, so I want to build with people is what it really comes down to. And I think when you look on like X, for example, on people that are building things, you'll see a lot of young builders who, maybe they just graduated, they don't have a job yet. And sometimes they'll ask, how do you come up with ideas? Like, where do you get all your ideas from? And I always say in education, there's no shortage of ideas. Everything's broken. And a lot of things that we have are outdated because nobody has stepped forward to update them. We are using technology that is old, and some of it is not very functional, and very little of it talks to each other, which is the biggest thing. I think when you look into other fields, you have these platforms where everything's connected. So anyone that you need to work with, you can access. Any data you need is connected in some way or can be connected. I think education, it is partially because of the different monopolies from different companies, but it's also because of how sensitive the information is. So I think to really understand what to build to make it effective, you need to be someone from the inside. There's a lot of, you can look at what's being adopted right now and what's out there that's AI for education. A lot of it's being adopted in districts, but if you really look at the usage and how effective it is in those spaces, you'll see that if an educator wasn't involved in developing it, in making it, there's often holes that cannot be really anticipated if you're building it from an outside lens. So I think that's a big reason why I feel like we need to build our own solutions. And so this is part of why I go and I speak at conferences. I want to find that community that's interested in building, but I also do want to inspire people who maybe have thought about it and don't know how to jump in or how to start or are unsure on like when to start. One of my slides that I always have says the best time to start was yesterday, and the second best time is today or right now. So, and I really believe that. I think a lot of people, for a lot of things, will wait for that right moment. But with something that's emerging like AI, there is no right moment. Like you just start now, you do a little bit today, you do a little bit tomorrow, and then soon that becomes a habit and your learning just compounds. There's just so much coming out. I think there's never a time that would be bad. And I think the longer you wait, the bigger the gap is in what is out there and what you know. So I think ultimately, I would love to have a community of educators that all want to build so that we can build faster and build more tools. With a lot of the newest things that are coming out, like OpenClaw, which was, Moltbot and ClaudeBot before that, there's the opportunity to bring in a lot more like agent type builds and a lot more like different modalities compared to before. So I have two conferences I'm speaking at in March. I'll be bringing like physical AI with me, which is new. Before, everything I did was virtual, but I'm actually going to have this bot that can use a camera to read people's badges. And then they select the resources they want, and it's going to print it out as a QR code on a like receipt machine. And I think introducing this other aspect of it, the physical side, can perhaps spur some educators to think about how this can apply in their classroom. Because I think for teachers, some of the physical stuff actually might be more useful to them, or they might make more direct connections than building a website for something. So it's something I want to definitely start playing with more. And I'm bringing it to the conferences because I want to see educators' responses to it. I want to see if it scares people or if it intrigues people because it's going to be interesting. It's mostly administrators that I speak to at these conferences often, but actually the ones that are most vocal and connect with me afterwards are usually teachers. Like if
Mm.
teachers or service providers go, they're often the ones that want to talk. So I'm very interested in seeing how people react. Because a little bit of this is like, it seems like actual robots that are entering the picture, and I know that scares people. So I'm interested to see the response to it. I'll let
Yeah.
you know.
No, for sure. I think what you were sharing about the ideas, like a lot of these entrepreneurs who are building are young kids because they're like, I just got out of high school. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And so we are like old and we have jobs and we got families that we gotta make sure they eat and things like that. So it's definitely a different game. And I think they might have a lot of more time than us. but they
Mhm.
definitely don't have the expertise and the domain and the insights for sure. And yeah, I think I love what you said. Everything's broken, everything's outdated, and
Yeah.
we need insiders to build. I so see that. And that really excites me about like what you're talking about, the community of builders, educator builders. I don't know. I think we need to come up with a new word for it, but that's very exciting. And there was a conference recently that I was talking to these like venture people, fun guys, and they went to the biggest technology conference like in
Mhm.
Las Vegas or something like that. I forgot. Is it called
Mhm.
like CES or something like that? And they were like, surprisingly, most of the startups that they're seeing is hardware, meaning
Mm.
like they have like dogs that bark around and take pictures of elderly or like seeing the elderly so that the elderly is not falling and make sure that they're taking their medicine and
Mhm.
all that stuff. And so I would imagine that hardware is going to soon enter into the educational space. And I'd be
Yeah.
very curious as to what the response is going to be for the speakers out there. Yeah, that's really exciting. Anything else that you want to add to your vision of the future of teacher builder?
I would love I've thought about this a lot, and you were talking about it too when we were messaging prior to this. But I do think at some point school needs to change. And I think part of that change needs to be to allow educators time to be creative. I would love for that to be involving, using AI to create things. But I just think in general, teachers go from the beginning of the day to the end of the day with very few breaks. I haven't taught in a number of years, but I do remember having to plan out how much water, you I keep getting auto muted, sorry. You can't just go to the bathroom, right? And
Oh
that's
yeah.
something that people don't understand when they're outside of education, that you really do have to plan when you take breaks, and you can't step outside if you're overwhelmed. I mean, you can, but then you have to face the consequences of what happens when you enter back to your space. So, I forget why I was saying that, but, you need someone who understands that, who's experienced it.
Yeah. No, I always, this is what I preach to, I guess, into the void, is that to reimagine education, you need pedagogy, technology, and policy. And structurally, the way that our days are designed as teachers, I really do think it needs to change because you're right. We need creative space. We need time to play and to experiment. And when our days are just packed back to back with classes where we can't even use a restroom. No, there are times where, man, I had to use the restroom so badly, but I have to teach. And then I had to call the person next to me. I was like, hey, can you watch my classroom real quick? It was so challenging, right? To be able to have that space, I think, for teachers, I think is going to be important. And I really do want to go into, I don't know if go into is the right word, but I want to speak to more AI policy people, not AI policy people, but just educational policy people, just to see what it will look like in the future to reimagine the structure for teachers. And I'm sure it would be a massive undertaking. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about the hackathon and your community. And maybe just as we're going into the last portions of the podcast, I want to know, what is your view on AI and education, and more specifically now in special education? So, just maybe some insights that you've been gaining as you've been speaking to other people, experimenting with AI. What are your thoughts on AI in education these days?
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation around AI in education started with and kind of has stayed in this idea of privacy being an issue. I think people hyper focus on like the impact of allowing AI to have any sort of control over student information or access to students. And I understand the value of those conversations, but I think that we're losing a lot of time focusing on just that. I think there's a
Mm,
lot of school districts working on creating policies, right? Like what AI is allowed, what is not, how it's used in the classroom, how it's used by students. And while I do think you need to have policies in place, I think we're really missing this opportunity to use AI productively. I always say, like, it's what is the focusing on the problem when you could be
mm,
building a solution that addresses that problem, right? So I so much time talking about how AI can be an issue, can be a problem, but I think it's more important to talk about what you're doing, what you're putting in place so that you're not leaking student information, so that you're not allowing students access to something that isn't doesn't have oversight. And I think the more time we spend not putting that in place, the more dangerous AI actually becomes. So the discussion about how dangerous it becomes is actually preventing us from putting things in place that make it less dangerous.
mm,
And I always say in the talks that I give that I'm not here to talk about AI policies and like whether or not it's good or bad. I think it's both good and bad. And I think it can become more good if you focus on using it correctly and you focus on understanding it. So more time needs to be put into training educators
mm,
and actually using AI with them,
mm,
like actively using it and trying it together. I think of telling people do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. It's what we talk about in education in general. I think we do
mm,
this often. We know the best way to teach is to model for students and instead of just telling, right? Yet often when it comes to new things and policies and stuff that comes from the top, we are doing exactly what we know doesn't work. We're just telling people, right? We're
mm.
saying you can't do this, or we're saying you need to use this. But
Yeah.
we really need to just sit with our educators and model how to do it, which is why I had brought up with you I would love to have a teacher hackathon because I think the people who are resistant or unsure about AI, but may end up being the people who have the best insight on what to create, would respond well to being in a space with other educators, getting a lesson on how to use the tool and then being allowed to just create. So that I think that's where I kind of stand right now with AI in education. It's not going to go away. So we have to figure out how we're going to use it. And we need to actually make those decisions instead of just talk about it.
I love that because I hear often people talk about not what's just wrong and dangerous about AI, which I have also talked about many times.
Hmm.
And I think what's more important than not than just talking about the problem is to have the solution to the problem that you're talking about. So with one of the recent podcasts I was on or that I had, like we were just talking about reimagining education. People often talk about, well, like we have to change education, like it's a broken system and this is wrong, it's bad, whatever. And then now the question was, okay, now you're saying that it is bad, that is broken. Now, do you have a version of it that you see that as that is a solution to the problem that you're proposing that it is? And I don't know, maybe they do. And often people might just like to say, here's a problem, just to say that it is a problem. And
Hmm.
like when it comes to data privacy and student privacy, which by the way are so important, and we have to think clearly and very actively about it. And at the same time, just to keep saying that, hey, it's a problem, we got to be careful with it, we got to be careful with it, and have no solution that you're working on to solve the problem might be preventing us from moving forward and creating a better system or structure around AI. And it brings me to an idea of parenting AI. I was on an episode with Kunal Dalal. He's one of the educational leaders that I know. And he talks about how we're all parenting AI and we have to parent it well. And this could be this very powerful baby that could do a lot of good in the world, or it might just go the other way. Yeah, that's really cool. And I love the idea of just sitting down with educators. Today, I actually had an opportunity to do some like creating performance task assessments, like being able to connect different cool ideas of math, Tupac, war on drugs, and quadratics all together. And we did that through deep research. And we had all the teachers go and use deep research on the particular subject. And they were like, oh, wow, this, I never knew that this existed. And just being with them, I think, is so powerful rather than, like you said, hey, go ahead and do this, go ahead and do this. And so I really like the idea of a teacher hackathon or an educator hackathon. Do you have any plans to build this out, like practically? And
Yeah, I don't know. I have too many ideas. So, I would still like to do it, and I think I don't think I have the right partners for it yet, and I think that's where I'm stalled. I can see it happening in like a local library or, using the space at a school. But I think it would be best if there was some sort of sponsor. So some tool that the teachers would use to, create whatever it is. But, I can see putting it together. If I had district-wide partners or partners from other districts in the area, it's something that I definitely would love to lead. I would also love to participate in one, but, it's not like there's a lot out there for me to sign up for. So
yeah,
still compete with just the tech people right now.
yeah. It'd be so cool, like for Base 44 or Replit or Claude, to imagine Anthropic supporting this. That'd be nuts. Which,
Mhm.
I mean, I think it definitely is possible. So maybe just two questions before we end, and maybe you can converse them together, however you want to tackle it. What is your why, and what made you want to do all of this in the first place? And maybe you just talked about helping teachers, and if that's cool. And I feel like there's a why that is like burning inside of you, and like this passion that is calling you and pushing you to continue to take risks. So I want to know your why. And then lastly is, what is your word of encouragement and hope for anybody who is listening to the podcast?
Okay. So my story behind like where I started, I think it comes from the work that we do is really heavy, and it's some of it's repetitive even though my days are very different. And I felt like I was in a place where I was doing pretty much the same type of things every day, going home, just like doom scrolling, or watching like senseless TV. And I realized I had lost some of that passion for life. That's, I don't know, it sounds extreme when I say it, but like when I discovered AI, I did finally connect with this need for intellectual stimulation,
Mm,
need for a challenge, and this desire to like build, break, and then rebuild things. So I think it kind of tapped into, there goes my audio again. I enjoyed, being part of competitions. I enjoyed that, like doing something that you haven't been able to do before or haven't done before and then succeeding. I always say there's a high that comes with it,
mm,
which is I think the healthiest high that exists in the world, where there's something that you weren't able to do before and then you conquer it. And it's often through failing, right? So you have to fail to learn, you have to fail to improve. And for me, there's a lot of people that are afraid to fail. I think the way that I see it is I need to fail as fast as possible because it defines like where I currently sit with the situation.
mm,
So it's something that like wasn't in my life for a long time. I was giving myself experiences and new challenges by going into different roles, but I was still doing roughly the same thing. So
mm,
it was still, the same field. It wasn't like I was faced with things that I felt like I couldn't do before. It was just always new things. And so I joined this no code and AI boot camp run by Maven, actually, the summer of 2024. And I hadn't touched AI at all before that. So I hadn't even used ChatGPT. So I joined that, and I really just fell in love with it. There was so much problem solving with it. And back then, I was using no code tools like Bubble. So it wasn't even like vibe coding at that point. It was like image generation. It was a lot of like pieces of things. And I, got into it and moved with it as it expanded. And I'm now at a place where I actually can access my home computer from my work computer. And I'm not working on my projects at work, but I do go in, and if I see that it has stalled or it's paused, I will say continue. And so I'm like constantly building things with Claude Code, and it's just really opened up this it's exciting, like for me it is the most fun that I've had in a really long time, and it just satisfies that need to like create, need to build things. And it's really cool to be able to build something in one prompt, and to have it what you saw in your head just out there immediately. So I think that's a big part of why I decided to do it. And I think if I were to leave people with something, it's what I had said before, which is the best time to start was yesterday, but the next best time to start is right now. And I think if you think it's too daunting, just remember what we tell children all the time is break it down and do little by little. You can do 5 minutes of prompting with an AI every single day if that's all the time you have. If you do that every single day for a month, you will be better at it at the end of the month than you were at the beginning. So everyone has time. Another thing I always say is we all have time for anything that we choose to make time for. So if you want to get into AI, you have to choose to make time for it. And you can have time, and you can maybe discover something that you really want to do with it that you never knew you had a passion for before. So go out there and try it.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that piece. As you were sharing, I just had this feeling of maybe, I don't know, like peace or like contentment or I guess hope. I think hope is the right word as you were sharing. I was like, wow, there are people like Megan out there who might have been a little down in sometimes, but found something that she enjoys and she stepped fully into it. And now it gives her life, gives her purpose. And
Mm.
I feel like AI could be that for a lot of people as well. So it's a message of hope for people. And that's the word that's resonating with me right now. So thank you, Megan. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for getting on the AI Math Guy podcast. And thank you for all those who are listening. Appreciate your time. And until the next episode, we'll catch you guys then. All right, everyone. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye bye.